All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Geng Lin, EVP and CTO of F5, and I'm joined today by Chris Steffen, Managing Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates, and Ken Arora, Distinguished Engineer and Cybersecurity Architect at F5. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Hello.
In today's conversation, we will discuss application security, with digital technologies and digital services being dominant in our economic activities and social lives. Cybersecurity is omnipresent. App security is a key component of cybersecurity. Today, we'll focus on the technologies and the best practices in protecting applications. This discussion will not only give us the opportunity to address the current challenges, but also to look ahead at what's coming next in app security. Our goal is not just to talk about what the challenges are, but also to share best practices and advices on how to deal with these challenges. I'd like to encourage you to add your questions and comments into the chat area, and we will make every effort to address them all. First, let me ask Chris and Ken to tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in cybersecurity. Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So again, hello, everybody. And thank you for inviting me to this conversation today. I look really forward to it. And I can tell you, everybody that's listening from the pre-chat that we have, you will not be bored with this conversation for sure. Again, as Geng mentioned, I'm Chris Steffen. I am the Managing Research Director of Information Security at EMA. I'm a longtime security practitioner, 25 years. I have all the technical certs and so on and so forth. You can go visit me on LinkedIn. I'm there as well. But I do a lot of research in regulatory compliance, zero trust, and I'm doing some right now on API security, as we were just talking. I'm also the co-lead of the Zero Trust Working Group for the Cloud Security Alliance, and I know we'll be talking a little bit about that today. So a lot of great stuff on the list to talk about, and very much looking forward to the conversation.
And hi, I'm Ken Arora. Just so happy to be here with such, both bright and opinionated people. I'm looking forward to this conversation. As for myself, I have been working cybersecurity for over 20 years, mostly on the development side. So I've been helping build solutions for cybersecurity, everything from network firewalls through web application firewalls, using machine learning for DDoS defense. They're doing things at scale, and 20 years is enough time where I noticed that, it's interesting how things, history tends, if not repeating, it rhymes. And that's kind of an interesting trend I've seen over time.
It is very cyclical. There's no question about it.
Yep. Indeed. Thank you both. So since our focus of today's discussion is application security, let me start from the area of access to an application. So let's talk about APIs. Research shows that now 80% of application access is through APIs, so not human access anymore. So APIs represent one of the most vulnerable areas in app security. So let me ask Chris, as an industry analyst, you have the opportunity to see a wide range of companies in their cybersecurity practice. How do you see the main challenge in API security?
Yeah, I have hard research and I have anecdotal research, and both are relevant. When talking to a customer in the last, I guess it was about 4 months ago, I was shocked to hear that they had an API in their environment that was 18 years old. Now, if you know anything about security and you think that the security that we had in 18 years ago is the same as today, you're probably on the wrong phone call. The reality of it is that's particularly scary. And it comes from a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of concern about, messing with something if it's working. There's also a lot of concern about, I guess there's just an inherent belief and overconfidence that their APIs are protected and their APIs are documented and their APIs are secure. And they find out that that's really not the case. Some of the research that I did showed that a company believed that, they had a very significant number of their APIs documented, but then they only knew what they considered to be 70% of the APIs in their environment. And so that's 30% that are literally left there hanging out and free for the world to attack. So there's a lot of misconceptions about APIs. There's a lot of real concerns. And I really do feel that understanding how APIs are working and how they play in an environment is really kind of the next evolution of where security is going to be focused, which I think is a great thing. It's not a simple task. It's not something that is a one and done thing. You really do need a fairly in-depth understanding of environments and platforms and development and so on and so forth. And so when you talk about the skills gap that's out there, that's another one of those issues that is constantly an issue out there. So anyway, I could ramble on this all day. That's three things that immediately come to mind when I think about APIs from a security space that really need to be talked about and really need to be looked at.
Yeah, I think indeed, API sprawls, and it's everywhere. So how to protect them is a big thing. So now let me turn to Ken. From a technologist point of view, what are the key components do you see in the API security solution? And also, what are some of the common threat and vulnerability patterns in against APIs?
Yeah, no, thanks. I jumped the gun a little because that story that Chris just said about having an 18-year-old API, my first thought is, wow, I'm impressed the customer even knew they had an 18-year-old API there.
Well, you should be scared to death, right?
Right.
Again, without disclosing names, it was a financial services company. Yeah. They had an SLA that basically said, touch this and die kind of thing. And they literally been running on the same source code that long. So yeah, it's extremely scary.
It is. And my second thought on that, after doing that, was if they've got that one they know about, how many others do they have that they don't know about?
Absolutely.
And I think that's the first, like if I'm talking to a customer about APIs, the first question is, do you know all the APIs you have and how much confidence do you have? Sometimes it's ad hoc. Sometimes they say, oh yeah, we've got this inventory. And you go, okay, great. How sure are you about your inventory? So the first step is, and you come from the governance background, is to know what you have. And there are a set of, trying to be, and my goal today is also to give the audience members something to walk away with. So some action items, some things to think about as they go along this. So first, do you have tools that can automate inventorying your API? That's the first step. Then you can start saying, okay, well, how's an API supposed to work? And we've made progress. I think this is good news, right? Over the last few years, right? As we've, I think more and more open API Swagger has been adopted, and that's useful. That's like, okay, I've got a formal definition of my APIs, and maybe I can use that to manage life cycles. But here's the thing. I think that they only take you so far. There's when I think about protecting APIs, I think about two things. I think about availability and I think about abuse. And those are sometimes related. Like availability, the old school way of dealing with availability is to say, oh, well, I'll just use a massive DDoS attack and I'll overwhelm your API. And that still happens. But now there's fancier things. Like I see more, one of the things transitions I see happening is that attackers are now going after business logic. I want to stop Chris from getting into a particular website, right? I'm trying to do a financial attack against Chris, and one of the things he might do is log into his bank. So I want to make sure he can't do that. I'll go and how many banks have APIs that say, oh, after X failed login attempts, I'm going to lock you out until you do something else. Now I've just made it harder for Chris to get in to rectify the problem. Maybe it's going to make my phishing attack, my spear phishing, a little more effective. I see that, you see that with Ticketmaster. You saw what happened with Taylor Swift. You see that with airline reservation systems, where some people will take a reservation and hold on to it for a while and use it and just continually do that as a way of holding on to seats and reselling them. Those are, I'll pause. But I mean, these are things that are happening. This is where the market's going. Think about abuse. Think about scraping. think about the other attack surfaces.
Yeah, I think the example Chris gave, the 18-year old API out there and being exploited, reminded me another example I remembered, that this was actually one of the major financial services leaders, a major bank in the US. In fact, they had the examples are everywhere, but this particular case was a dev test introduced API, and it was a private API introduced by a developer in testing his code, and it was just left out there and unnoticed. And the person, of course, left the company after X years. And then this API somehow being discovered by the bad guys and being exploited. And then the bad guy actually used this dev test temporary API, supposedly to be temporary API, and get into the system and compromise the bank, some of their systems in the bank. So those examples are everywhere. And now API is one of the biggest problems in the app security. So thank you for sharing both the examples and also some of the common threat and vulnerability patterns. Now, we've talked about API's role and API security. Now let's switch a little bit to the attacks on users of an application. Ken actually started to touch this a little bit. With increasing sophistication on in automation, user attacks now have evolved way more sophisticated than before. They evolved from DDoS into intelligent automation-based bot attacks, and even to account takeovers, and even to the level of fraudulent transactions. So it is actually estimated that bad bots today account for a quarter to perhaps even up to 1/2 of the entire internet traffic. So Chris, give us a sense at the high level how bad the bot attack situation is and how pervasive the problem is.
It's bad. Okay. I mean, and our moderator here literally said the first comment that came up was from the Fine Hot Girls bot from YouTube. So to say that they are everywhere is literally the truth. I've heard the same numbers that you have, Geng. Somewhere between 30 to 40% of all the traffic out there is bot traffic. When you think about the attacks, I hear numbers that are anywhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of all the attacks that are out there today are bot generated. Something like, in the upper 90% range of APIs are being attacked by bots to kind of go full circle. So, I mean, it is a huge problem. Those bots are getting far more intelligent about what they do. I'll even give you another example that hits close to home for me. When we conduct surveys, we're looking to get 200 and 300 responses, and valid responses. And when I take and conduct a survey, I'm usually taking and asking somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 responses, because it takes that many to get and weed out the 1,000 bots that we're going to end up answering those questions, to actually find humans that are intelligent enough to answer those questions in general. So again, some of them are, you think that these little esoteric problems. Our friend Taylor Swift doesn't think that, from sure, with all the bots that attack the Ticketmaster website. But these are problems that are hitting normal people every single day. And I promise you, it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. The bots are getting smarter, and they're getting easier to initiate attacks. And then you have these, drone zombie armies of bots that are just, doing everything under the sun, from coordinated specific attacks to just, DDoS attacks to whatever have you. This is where attacks are coming from. The lone hacker, in the basement is the extreme exception if they are not working with bots or using bots to initiate their attacks.
Can maybe from a technology perspective, unpack a little bit, help us to understand how bot attack works, and what are some of the solutions and best practices to fight against it?
Yeah. So yeah, bots, and I'll even use the word automated attacks. I mean, they're definitely on the rise. And one perhaps oversimplification of it is you have what I'll call the armies of dumb bots, and these are commoditized, right? You can go off and get 1,000 CPU hours of bot time for under $1 these days on the black market, and they're very useful for certain sorts of attack. Like if I want to do a distributed DDoS, right? The lone hacker in the basement isn't going to try to do stuff from his basement. He's going to coordinate a bot army. And the problem is that problem's only going to get worse. The economy of scale is going to be getting worse because consumer IoT is a great space for that. There was an attack a couple of years ago, the Mirai botnet, and that was millions of just compromised IoT mostly routers, just that were on the internet, home routers that got compromised. They had the default password and they got used for distributed DDoS. Credential stuffing, right? You can again get for pennies on the internet lists of compromised usernames and passwords. Go just try them a bunch of places, see what hits. So I call that the volumetric approach, and you've got to watch out for those, because if you don't do that for me, if I'm a defender, if I'm trying to protect an enterprise, those I've got to do. There are techniques there. Those at least have historically been relatively easy. You can do simple things like signatures or simple biometrics to say how fast is this user typing a form, how quickly are they hitting return, and you can do some simple things and say this is a human, no, this isn't a human. I think what's going to be, and so those are the techniques, and there are a number of products, including some from F5, but others, as well, that can do that, and I think that's table stakes. Where I think the market's going, both the challenge and the solutions are going, is more sophisticated things. Chat GPT was in the news just, I think, made the news cycle yesterday, the day before. Imagine that being weaponized as a way of, it can do all sorts of things. I could enter a little bit of information about you, Geng. Maybe I can go tell ChatGPT, tell me what you know about Geng Lin, and then have it craft a spear phishing attack. And so it becomes a way of amplifying amplifying an attack, making it more intelligent cheaply. It'll get also used, you see it today, you saw it in political and affecting election outcomes. You don't have to do a lot of data mining. You just applying machine learning. I think here's the theme: as bots get smaller or smarter, you'll apply machine learning of relatively few questions of like, what are your likes and dislikes, lets you make a very good profile of somebody based on just what their Facebook shares are. And now you can again use that smarts to target individual people. I think those are going to be more challenging to stop. I think so. These are just some predictions. I think you're going to see sort of the arms race happening here, like deep fakes. There are deep fakes are a problem. Let's say deep fake images. If you go to Google, there are deep fake detectors, and that arms race has already started. I think we're going to have an arms race going on with bots. Bots are going to be increasingly mimicking human behavior, and we will build techniques, and that arms race will go on. Some of the tools in our defenders toolbox are things like looking for anomalies of behavior patterns. You can't randomize everything. I'll take a page from some stuff we've done in DDoS, where we look for patterns in the bad traffic, because even if the bad guys try to randomize the IP address and maybe how many hops they're coming from and a bunch of other parameters, there's things that they don't think about, or they can't easily randomize and make look like a human. And I think that's those sort of machine learning techniques and anomaly detection techniques are going to be the future of dealing with bots and automated attacks.
I think that we always talk about it, and I feel like it's a broken record, but people don't hear it. So I guess it's worth mentioning again, just basic cyber hygiene, right? Understanding, definition updates on the tools that you already have in place, and, educating your team and your staff and your employees and your parents and your grandparents and everybody else about, there are bad guys out there that want to try to steal, your stuff, either through, social engineering or whatever have you. And I think just, having that cyber awareness culture, I think, is very important. Yes, there's tools. Yes, that we're in battle. Yes, we're going to continue being in battle. And I don't think that battle's ever going to end. It's job security for us. Thank goodness, right? But at the same time, I would just assume that everybody have a basic understanding of what the bad guys are trying to do, and again, keep that basic cyber hygiene of updated definitions and updated technologies and so on and so forth. Keep those kind of things in mind too.
Yeah. And for those of you who even are slightly technical, just look at the firewall logs in your home router just to see what's going on. Which
you'd be shocked.
Yeah,
you'd be absolutely shocked.
Yeah. I think that exchange, this cat and mouse arms race between the attackers and defenders is a perfect illustration that what Chris talked about, that don't just overly rely on technology itself. Nothing replaces the human awareness, your mentality of protecting both yourself and also the business you are in. So this actually is a perfect lead to my next topic, zero trust. So this mindset of not to blindly trust something or someone, and so, but rather have this mindset of starting from least privileged, zero trust. And so is the new mindset for security professionals, and in fact for us ordinary citizens in our daily life to adopt. So we talked about the account takeover, fake accounts, and the deep fake, and so on, and even fraud transactions. This illustrates the need for zero trust in app security, in daily interaction. So can maybe tell us your interpretation of zero trust and how does it play into the application security?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I mean, I love zero trust. I love zero trust as a mindset for approaching security. I mean, at the most basic level, it's just have a good dose of healthy paranoia. But there's some real a little bit more concrete principles that I think are really useful to keep in mind in any context and for applications. Right. The first is, of course, just as you said, Geng, don't just blindly trust. Always verify. Also, don't make it a one and done thing. I think Chris talked about it earlier. It's got to be a continuous, ongoing, continuously assess, continuously reassess. Always, as you said, right, apply the principle of least privilege. Like, what does this user, this workload, what does this entity need to do its job, and only grant it those privileges. And finally, despite, I think about those as putting locks and cameras at the front door, but you have to assume that no matter how good your locks are, no matter where you put your cameras, that a particularly skilled or a particularly lucky adversary is going to get through them. And so you have to just assume you're going to get breached, and need a way to contain, remediate that what happens. And I bring up these principles because sometimes when I talk about zero trust to a customer, it quickly transitions to, oh yeah, we got zero trust. Maybe what they mean is we have zero trust access. And when I think about Beyond Corp and zero trust access, I see some of those principles being applied. Like, hey, always verify, right? Always verify the identity. Don't just count on, oh, you came in the VPN, so you must be good. So we do pretty good there. But we also need to get better about some things. Like, we do MFA, which is great when we talk about zero trust access, but we don't do a great job about being continuous about it. Like, all we really have is session timeout. Maybe we do, if you're fancy, you have step up auth for certain things, but we don't do a great job. So I think there are things we can improve over time to do a lot better. I mean, some of the stuff that, well, there are things we can do in access. I'll hold a little, not to go too long, but we can apply some of these principles to applications as well. And I'll give a teaser for maybe what comes later, but I'd like to talk about how do you apply zero trust to application workloads and what goes on, because the other hesitation I have or concern I have with where the path that we're on zero trust right now is we're doing a great job of defending the perimeter, that north-south API, but we're not doing a very good job of assuming breach, assuming the bad guys get in and defending what goes on inside our application.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I agree with every single word that you said. I look forward to having an east-west conversation on app security too. It is definitely a part of zero trust that I don't think that we talk about enough. I wanted to take and bring it back up a level though. I think there's a lot of people that look at zero trust, and it doesn't matter really what size your organization is, from 20 employees to 20,000 employees, and they start getting freaked out by the entire concept of zero trust and how complicated it is. And I will tell you, as a person that has interacted with the people that are creating the concept of zero trust and iterating on the concept of zero trust, it absolutely is not a complicated thing. And the more complicated you make it, the worse off your implementation is going to be. I know that's kind of counterintuitive, but I would impress upon everybody that going down a zero trust path, a zero trust journey, doesn't have to be this prescriptive all or nothing sort of thing. It is iterative. It is something that you do a little bit of identity, and then you do a little bit of app management, and then you do a little bit of device, and then you do a little bit of policy, and then you do so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden you are relatively zero trust compliant. But there is no such thing as I am zero trust or I am not zero trust. It is something that it is a journey to get there. But please don't take, if you take nothing away from this conversation, please realize that zero trust is not made to be complicated. There is plenty of resources out there. You can ping me on LinkedIn. I will send you LinkedIn over and over again resources about zero trust that you're welcome to take a look at, that are public domain. Please take it and have a look at that kind of stuff and get a firm understanding of what the experts say about how zero trust is implemented. But once you get past all those kind of things, then you can actually take and talk specifically about how app security falls into the overall zero trust conversation, which is something that I am personally interested in, because that is really the next iteration of how we are looking at zero trust. Once you have identity, once you've protected the devices, once you've protected the perimeter, which is practically gone at this point, then we talk about that east-west traffic and what we need to do to protect that. So, I mean, I look forward to that conversation as well.
Yeah. I was going to jump in and say, Chris, so I agree with everything, agree with what you said. It's a journey. So I think that you can look at each of those questions I asked. How are you doing in terms of verifying? What are the things you can verify? What are the things you're just trusting because you can't verify them? Think about it in terms of are you continuously looking? Like, what things are one and done, what aren't? And it's just a way of grading yourself to understand, it's not I'm not zero trust. It's just a mindset to use to evaluate yourself and do a self-assessment and understand, where the risks are and where it is will give you the best return on investment for getting hardening.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things where this is a concept, and Geng is actually one of the founders of that concept, which he's not going to admit, but I will be the first to admit. And when you hear even the initial concept hasn't changed. Yes, the scope has expanded, but don't get caught up on trying to have everything and do everything at once. This is something that you can accomplish in no matter what your size environment is, and you can accomplish and improve your overall security posture just by implementing a very, very few straightforward cyber hygiene sort of things. And then you build upon that. And like I said, we can talk about East-West. I would love to take and talk about that a bit more, but understanding the fundamentals, I think, is key. And then building upon those fundamentals is really the best approach to zero trust. But again, don't make it overly complicated.
I think that the concept of zero trust is not a black and white binary thing. I'm either in zero trust or I'm in total trust, and so on. Leads to the notion of continuous risk assessment and management. So something that the system is never absolutely safe. Is however also absolutely not in a state of you have to be in a panic mode, and then I have to halt everything and spend trillions of dollars to upgrade it. So the continuous assessment behind the scene is a key concept, associated concept in the zero trust mindset.
Well, and let me add to that too, Geng. The other part of that too is that even if you have a point in time, that's all well and good, but who lives in an environment that's not evolving, right? I mean, constantly changing, constantly iterating, you're constantly upgrading your technology stack. So you have to be constantly reevaluating your risk. So I didn't mean to sidetrack you there, but that's also a part that I think that we overlook. This is not a point in time thing. This is something that's ongoing and continually evolving in every environment that there is, whether you're cloud-based, whether you're on-prem, whether you're hybrid. It doesn't matter. All of those environments are constantly undergoing some level of change, which means that you need to be continually looking at your risk and looking at your compromise profile.
Yeah. And anything on that topic, anything, Ken, you want to add on the continuous risk assessment and management?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's an area where we, like I said, today, the solutions that are bandied about aren't great. And I take Chris's point to heart. I don't mean to scare anybody saying if you're not doing it, you're not practicing zero trust. This is a journey. These are just steps along the way. And you'll see stuff from F5 that I've talked about as well. Goes deeper into this. But one of the things that I would advocate is to express your look. Security is never of 100%. There's always security ultimately boils down to risk versus reward, right?
Always.
What is the risk of allowing this transaction, and what is my business reward for allowing it? And that's how you view it. And so when it comes to identity specifically, one of the things we're working on is to say, don't treat identity as a static one and done thing, but treat as a binary yes, no, but treat it as a confidence level. And then also with each transaction, say, how much confidence do I need? So to take it, we've been using financial examples in this conversation. So using the financial example, say, hey, if Chris wants to check his bank balance, maybe I only need 75, 80% confidence it's Chris. If Chris, on the other hand, and wants to make a deposit, maybe that's even lower. That's fine. If Chris wants to, though, transfer his account to another bank, maybe I need 90%. And if that bank is in a particular country, maybe it's got to be 98, 99%. And then you have your policy. What's my current confidence? And that's a dynamic thing. It'll depend on how Chris has been behaving compared to how he used to behave. It depends on metadata, like where is Chris geographically, what time of day is it? And we adapt, and we say, hey, there's not enough confidence there. And then we say, okay, what can we do? This could be, do more authentication, do a step up. Maybe it's, provide a stronger form of authentication, like, hey, do you have a copy of the passport or some biometrics or whatever? And the implementation will vary depending on the domain. But think about this, that really embracing the concept of its risk versus reward, embracing the concept of continuous assessment, using confidence identity as a score is a key part to this. And I'll pause here. I would like, if there's time permits, also we can have that conversation about East-West and identity. But first, Chris, you were nodding. I don't know if you had something.
Well, no, anybody that wants to put money in my account, feel free. I mean, don't feel like you need my permission. If you'd like to put extra money there, knock yourself out. But when it comes to taking out that money, yes, I don't want you to be able to do that without my authorization, right? So I think that constant evaluation of user profile, device profile, so on and so forth, and then as we can discuss from an East-West perspective, even the application profile. Is it a trusted application? Does the application have an identity in and of itself? Is this an application that you interact with before? I mean, there's a lot of, continuing the financial services conversation, you can use Vimo and Zelle and all those other things. Those are relatively well known, PayPal, whatever have you. But let's say that I want Bob's Bank and Trust app to transfer money. I don't know Bob's Bank and Trust. Am I going to take and use them to transfer money? Or more specifically, am I going to give them and do a wire transfer to them to take and pay for a new car or a house? Or And again, maybe if it's, paying back a friend at a bar for $15 for a drink order, okay, well, whatever. If it's, $15,000 to pay for a down payment on a house or a car, well, that's a totally different story. So again, those device profiles, those application profiles, that user profile, I think is critical to understanding and evaluating the risk in general as to how you should proceed.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to the topic of identity, which I think both of you actually highlighted in this zero trust and risk assessment and management context, the importance of identity. So we'll come back to that maybe with one more question. But I also wanted to bring up a topic and invite you to both to comment on, which is the conversations we had here illustrate a situation where, as digital transformation goes on and as digital services are the main form of the majority of the vertical industries to conduct their business. Think of the bank now. More and more services are offered through your mobile phone and your web account. You don't need to physically go to a branch to do that financial transaction or deposit something or create even a new account.
Some banks don't even have physical locations.
Exactly.
Yep.
It's totally digital. So in that context, we've seen a pattern where security is actually embedded inside of the digital service. You have to think of the security in the context of the service you are offering. And that's where risk and reward, risk assessment kicks in. So this actually illustrates a new model of thinking. Used to be that as security professionals, we think of security outside of the services or the digital services we're supporting. So and completely separate, and therefore I'm shooting for a absolute rooting out of the potential attacks, or so that black and white kind of thinking. So in this context where the security is actually you need to consider as part of the digital service or the service you are protecting, the investment, the dollars versus the reward in the measurement of a risk score, whatever that is actually important. So can you comment on in this context, the evolution of the security thinking onto a more merged with the target services itself? So any new concepts or any new thinking there?
Well, I don't know. I can start only because so my wife is a lawyer, and so one of the things during the pandemic is she does a lot of documents that need to be e-signed or notarized, and the whole little industry, digital industry, is been built around electronic notarization, remote online notarization, it's called. And right, and that when you think about the purpose of notarization, it is all about authentication, saying, are you really who you claim to be? And when you think about it, as that digital workflow was designed, there were things that were taken into account because as being baked into, to your point, Geng. For example, it isn't sufficient to say, hey, I've got this e-signature or I've got this certificate. Her stamp is now a digital certificate. But we need to find, if Chris wanted to something notarized, I would need actually to record a video session with Chris where I'm hearing him acknowledge that he's Chris. And so you can think about, in some ways you can think about that as an extension of MFA, but it's really about, having that stronger authentication. I've got video evidence of somebody who claimed to be Chris, acting like Chris, claiming this to be true. I also have data retention things that are built in, like, okay, how do I make sure that video is retained, not tampered with, so that I can go back and prove, and I think maybe we were talking about governance. We touched upon it a little bit, and that's Chris's area, right? You need to also comply with that. So that's an example that quickly comes to mind because what my wife does, where digital processes are now baking in security as part of the workflow.
Yeah, you're seeing, and it's, I think this is only good news. You're seeing even at almost every level of the enterprise, but even every level of our lives, people are becoming more security aware. You're seeing, applications that are actually considering the purpose and the driver and the business case for that application and the security that you need to bake into the application right from the very get-go, instead of it being a bolt-on at the end. Again, it's how, I'll just give you a really simple example. There are three ways to look at data security. You have data security, at rest, how that data is encrypted sitting on a store. You have data security in transit, how that data is protected, like on a network between point A and point B. And then the last one is, and it's the undiscovered country, if you want to use the Star Trek reference. It's the data in use. And we're finally starting to pay real attention at the application layer of, when you have protected information, how that information is protected while the application is using that particular piece of information, that piece of data, as part of whatever process that application is supposed to be doing. That's kind of new, right? That's not something that even 10 years ago that we really cared about at all. That's not something that was really a driving factor in how we developed an app. But you're seeing that more and more, and you're going to start seeing regulations that are around that particular area. How, you have data at rest kind of figured out. You have data in transit pretty much figured out, through TLS or whatever have you. And now, how are you taking and doing data in use? Are you taking and having, what protections are you giving that data when it's all said and done? And so it is the next horizon. It's the next thing that we need to kind of deal with. But my broader point is that 5 years ago, we would never have been thinking about that to begin with. That's not something that was really part of the mindset. And so this whole idea of a security-centric business, a security-centric workload, and how security plays a part in what are considered to be normal business processes, I think is very important. But the great news is that I think it's translating down the stack too. I think that I'll use my parents as an example, who are not technical people, I promise. Even they have an understanding about spam calls and, who to give their information to, and so on and so forth. It could have been 10, 15 years ago that somebody would have called on the phone and said, "We want to fix your account. We're the cable company. Will you give us your account information so we can fix it?" And they would have been, "Of course, yes, here you go." Now we live in a time where they're like, "Well, how do I know that it's you? And can I just call you back with that information?" They've jumped to that next level of understanding how data security is important in their own personal lives. But that translates to a lot of other things in a lot of other places too. So again, not to belabor the point, but you're seeing it being more pervasive as part of really every process. But I'm very encouraged to think that when we look at app development in general, SecApp dev and just sec dev in general is becoming more and more mainstream and becoming a table stakes process in any kind of application development.
Yes, that's great. Before I open up for the audience, pick up some questions from the audience area. Let me actually ask one more question related to the risk assessment and identity, and in particular the east-west traffic inside of the castle per se. Now we understand that the parameter-based protection is no longer the absolute safeguard, and you have to prepare for the scenario where bad guys are inside of the castle because of every potential vulnerability routes. So talking about continuous detection and response risk assessment, and especially in the context of application traffic, east-west, inside. So can you comment on a little bit of the key technologies are in those areas?
Oh, sure. Actually, Chris's comment earlier was a great lead in also for this topic. When you're talking about data in use, imagine the way that applications are built today, right? Their modern applications are a collection of these cooperating microservices. And so you apply that principle of least privilege, right? To say which microservices, which small subset of microservices really need this sensitive privileged data. And you make sure that only those workloads have access to it, those microservices, and the other don't. And that's, again, applying those principles that we talked about earlier about zero trust down at the workload level. I think there's more analogies that we can take from what we did at the access level and apply it to the workload, because you can imagine identity. I mean, I think Spiffy is a really promising technology for, there are multiple implementations, but the idea, the concept of assigning identities to workloads and having them authenticated and be authorized for particular actions, that's a very powerful concept. And it's not just an abstract one or one that doesn't matter. I mean, this is very top of mind for me, because as I think about the next generation of threats, I think about, what happens with open source software and compromised supply chains, or compromised services. Like I'm calling third party, Chris had the example of Bob's Bank and Trust, I think.
Yep.
And imagine, I don't know, this is a workload I don't know anything about. So maybe it's bad. And so assigning, so compromise of those are like, that's the ultimate insider attack. They're part of your application. And so I'll give one more example. Imagine ransomware. Ransomware by and large works by, hey, I'm going to take this data, I'm going to read a bunch of files from a file system and encrypt them, or maybe from S3 buckets. Imagine that I could say, hey, here's a workload that normally doesn't even read from S3 buckets or write back to the file system. And here it is doing tons of these operations. That's a good indicator of compromise, right? And if you could do that, that would stop the large majority of ransomware attacks. So, those technologies of identities for key technology you asked about, workload identities, continuous observation of workloads, looking at system calls, looking at network traffic identity, those are all key things to deal with those sorts of threats.
Yeah, I love the idea of application identity. And when, again, to kind of come full circle, when we talk about zero trust, we talk about the identity of the person. We even talk about the identity of the device, and the concept of talking about the application, the identity of the application, and the services or even the components that make up the application is particularly interesting to me. It's something that, again, we're bleeding edge talking about. I don't think that we're really having that big of a conversation about. I invite anybody and everybody to continue that conversation. I think it's something that we do need to talk about. But it's a new concept, and it's one that I think we need to be paying attention to. It is a particular interest to understand where your application is from, where are the components coming from, how can I trust those particular components, and understanding that they're dealing with critical data. I mean, again, let's just use financial services stuff. They're using credit card numbers and social security numbers. You can go to the healthcare services and they're using, your whatever PHI information that you might be transmitting, so on and so forth. That's information that you don't want out to the entire universe. So if you're using some kind of, untrusted DLL or some untrusted stack, what are you doing with yourself? How do you know that what you're doing is going to be okay for your organization? And the answer is truly, you don't. So understanding those things, I think, is really, really compelling, and really kind of the next avenue that we're going to talk about when it comes to zero trust. I quite bluntly think that we could sit there and talk for an hour about that alone. Maybe that's our next LinkedIn live chat will be that.
Yeah, this is a great exchange. So I'm also watching at the time. We're getting closer to the end of our time limit. We do have some comments in the user area, but I would love to wrap up rather than risk us to get over the time limit. So I think this is a great conversation. We have talked about API in the context of protecting applications, which are the cornerstone, the backbone of today and tomorrow's digital economy. So we talked about API protection. We talked about automated bots and zero trust, application identity, risk management, assessment, and so on. And we also touched on the arms race between the bad guy and the good guy, the cat and mouse game, and both sides are constantly using the latest technology. How do you defend the business and everyday citizen? Which leads to a non-black and white picture on the security. Never think of technology can protect you for everything. So a comment from the audience will touch on that. The bad guy can use AI as well. So that's the nature of arms race. So so we touch on a lot of topics. So I really enjoy the exchange, and there are many concepts we can explore further. So I agree with Chris. We can actually have follow-up sessions on this. But to wrap up today, I would like to thank Chris and Ken for sharing your insights, and also for the audience for participating. So great exchange. Before we close, I want to remind everyone that you can download a free copy of the newly released O'Reilly book, Enterprise Architecture for Digital Business, at F5's website, f5.com/DEA, or grab a audiobook and listen. So thank you, everyone. See you next time.